As I'm sure you can see, in this lesson we have another Task-1 modelled writing video for the visual information known as a process, or sometimes it's called a diagram. Now, this type of Task-1 question is definitely very different to graphs, charts, maps and tables. So there's a different style of writing that you must understand in order to score highly in Task-1 process question. So we're going to talk about some of the differences, and then of course you're going to watch me write a full report for a process question. And first up, we're going to take a look at the paragraph structure that we will use for a process question. And I should start off by saying that it does pretty much largely remain the same as what you would do for any of the other Task-1 questions. So we have our paraphrased introduction. We have an overview, which is slightly different to the charts and graphs overview that we would normally write. And we have detailed paragraph 1 and detailed paragraph 2. So we're going to need to group the stages or the information that we can see in the process question, because then we can split our writing into detailed paragraph 1 and 2. In terms of the paraphrased introduction, I'd like to show you this opening sentence. Now, you can pretty much use this for any process question that you have. So, in a sense, your paraphrased introduction can almost certainly be this, unless the question does say illustrate, and then you could just change that word to display. So let's read through. The diagram illustrates the way in which a product is produced. Now, processes will generally have a finished product or task at the end. So this sentence will almost certainly fit for you. Okay, so what kind of features do I need to include? As I did say, it's quite different to a charts and graphs question. So what do we need to do for our process question? We're going to need to use time openers, so sentence openers for sequencing. And here's a few examples. Firstly, after that, finally. Now we use time openers so that we can order the stages in the process chronologically. So that means from the very start, from stage 1 right to the end. You'll also need to use the passive voice in your writing. I'll come back to that in just a second. Here's an example of a time opener. In the beginning, sawdust is added to a glue mixture to set. So that's just a quick example of using a time opener. And you could see that that would be for the first stage of the process. Okay, back to passive voice. Here is an example sentence using the passive voice. The food is driven to local food shops. So we make the passive voice by using be or is and are plus the past participle, which in our example sentence is driven. Let's take a bit of a further look at passive voice, as it is quite important for your report. So we use the passive voice to focus on the process, the process of what is happening, not who is doing it. And again, it's the verb be, is or are plus past participle. So the passive voice is making your writing more about the action that is happening, not who is performing the action. Here are a few examples. So in black, we have an active voice. Ferries deliver gas to the main island. And here I have changed the sentence structure round to create the passive voice. Gas is delivered to the main island by ferries. So gas really is the action of what is happening. We're delivering gas, and that has started at the start of my sentence. Gas is delivered to the main island by ferries. Let's take a look at another example. A large machine separates the olives and oil. So we can see that the who is the large machine and the what is the olives and oil. So to make that passive, I do the olives and oil are separated by a large machine. So in blue, we have examples of passive voice, and I'll be using lots of this in the modelled write shortly coming up. Now let's take a look at the question that I'll be writing the answer for. The process below shows the main stages in a supply chain. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. So taking a look at the information in the center of our process diagram, it reads supply chain management, and around the side there's flexibility, quality and speed. So this is all about the process of a supply chain, creating some kind of product, and it seems to be dealing with customers as well. Let's take a look at the first stage. We have order logging and planning, and then moves on to product design and development. We have procurement, then manufacturing, acceptance, logistics, and support. So I would say that this really is quite a normal looking process diagram. We have 7 stages, and we can see quite clearly that there is a structure to what is happening. So we begin with an order of something, and then it finishes with some kind of customer support. When you do get your process diagram, it's good to read through the question, just like I did, and then have a look at the diagram. Try and find the title, and then look at the stage 1, look at the end stage, read the middle stages, and try and get a better understanding of what you are looking at. It's also important to note that sometimes the process diagrams might be a little bit confusing. You might not have a full understanding of what the process is. That's perfectly fine. It's not a test of your understanding of the process. It's a test of you being able to order your writing and describe the information that you see. So just remember that when you see these kinds of questions. Okay, it's time for us to move on to our plan. Now, I did say that we still have these 2 detailed paragraphs, so the 4-part structure remains the same. Paraphrased introduction, an overview, and 2 detailed paragraphs. That does mean that I'm going to have to group my data. I have 7 stages, so logically I'm going to split into 4 stages for one group and 3 for the other. That seems to make the most sense to me. So let's begin. Now, in a way, these kinds of plans for a process question are pretty easy to write. They shouldn't take you too long, as realistically, you just need to write the stages that you will describe into your plan. So group 1 will be stages 1 to 4. So order, logging and planning, product design, development, procurement, manufacturing. And then in group 2, I'm going to describe stages 5 to 7. So that's acceptance, logistics and support. That will go in group 2 and will be described in my second detailed paragraph. For the overview, we simply need to state what the first and last stages are. And I'll show you how to write that in a moment. But we've got order, logging and planning. And we have support. So that will be my second short paragraph, the overview, which I'll just quickly say what the first and last stages are. And you can do that for every kind of process question. Okay, so group 1, stages 1 to 4, which we have around here. And group 2, we have stages 5 to 7. Overview is stating that stage 1, order, logging and planning, and last stage is support. Okay, so let's move on to writing this report. Okay, so as always, we begin with our paraphrased introduction. And remember that I showed you the sentence, the diagram illustrates the way in which. Just check that the synonyms aren't going to match up. The language doesn't match up between my sentence for the introduction and the question. So let's read the question. The process below shows the main stages in a supply chain. So I can just type this in exactly as I showed you. The diagram illustrates the way in which, so let's have a think. A product is produced. So we are producing a product, some kind of product, and then we sort of deliver and support. So I might add a tiny bit to the sentence I showed you. The diagram illustrates the way in which a product is produced and delivered with support. So we've got the delivery and support added there. And like I said, this opening sentence will pretty much work for anything, but just be ready to be slightly flexible in case you need to add something to make it fit even better. So the diagram illustrates the way in which a product is produced and delivered with support. So we now need to move on to our overview. And as you'll probably remember, all our overviews can begin with overall. Overall, the supply chain management begins with the order logging and planning stage. The final part of the diagram is the support stage of our process. So let's just quickly read our overview back. Overall, the supply chain management begins with the order logging. Apologies for my spelling there. Add 2 G's, order logging and planning stage. The final part of the diagram is the support stage of our process. Perfectly fine. So it's now time for me to move on to our detail paragraph. So our first group is stages 1 to 4. And quite simply, to begin with the supply chain, starts with order logging and planning. Okay, so then we can use our next sequencing word, our time opener. After that, we can move on to the product design and development stage. Okay, so I'm trying not to use stage too often in my writing or it will become very repetitive. And quite simply we can write, next, materials and supplies are procured in order to create and build the necessary product. Okay, let's just have a quick read back. To begin with, the supply chain starts with order logging and planning. After that, we can move on to the product design and development stage. Next, materials and supplies are procured, and there we have an example of a passive sentence, are procured in order to create and build the necessary product. Then if we say once all materials have been collected, our supply chain process moves into the manufacturing stage of our diagram. Okay, so I'm not really giving much details of what might happen in each stage, as to be honest, I don't really know exactly what is being delivered or produced, but I can give an overall understanding, and quite simply, I am just describing how we're moving from one stage to the next using lots of time opening language, such as to begin with and after that and next. Okay, let's move on to our second detailed paragraph where we'll have acceptance, logistics and support. Let's have then the completed product must be accepted and assessed. for acceptance. So I assume at this stage in the process, the product's being created and given to whoever it's been sold to, they accept it. Okay, and after this, after the product's acceptance, the product is shipped and delivered out to wherever it needs to be, it logistically needs to be. And excuse my spelling again. I do find it quite difficult to do this whilst speaking. Logistically, okay. And here we have our final stage. So as for all these process questions, finally, our supply chain moves into the support stage of the process, and I think that's fine. So let's have a read back through that last detailed paragraph. Then the completed product must be accepted and assessed for acceptance. Quite a lot of A's there. After the product's acceptance, the product is shipped and delivered out to wherever it logistically needs to be. Finally, our supply chain moves into the support stage of the process. I think I've given a pretty good write-up of what is happening in this whole process. So let's go back to the start and read through. The diagram illustrates the way in which a product is produced and delivered with support. Overall, the supply chain management begins with the order logging and planning stage. The final part of the diagram is the support stage of our process. That's my overview there. To begin with, the supply chain starts with order logging and planning. After that, we can move on to the product design and development stage. Next, materials and supplies are procured in order to create and build the necessary product. Once all materials have been collected, our supply chain process moves into the manufacturing stage of our diagram. Then, the completed product must be accepted and assessed for acceptance. After the product's acceptance, the product is shipped and delivered out to wherever it logistically needs to be. Finally, our supply chain moves into the support stage of the process. So there's not a lot of extra information I'm giving. I'm just simply describing each of the stages from beginning to end in the process diagram that I have. So important things to remember. You definitely will need to use this 4-step structure and time openers to sequence and time order the stages in the process question. You're also going to need to use the passive voice, so it's definitely worthwhile practicing that. See you in the next lesson.